Hey, it's Vas here from Aussie RC Playground, and welcome to a video that I've been wanting to do for a number of years, and that's really to talk about upgrading your radios and talking about multi-model memory radios. Now, a lot of this has been prompted due to the fact that Arma have got some of the worst radios in the industry at the moment. I don't think there has been a product in the time that I've been doing YouTube videos and in the time that I've been in the hobby where people have hated a product so unanimously as they have these STX2 radios that are now coming out with the Arma cars. And of course, that's not also excluding the DX2 radios, which although are a little bit better, feel very much the same as far as the plasticky feel and the real cheapness of them. So a lot of people have been asking me, what should I upgrade my radio to? Can I bind a high-end Spectrum radio to the receiver that comes on the other Arma cars? And it's a bit of a yes and no answer, and I'm going to try and explain this one for you first up. So if you get a car that has the STX2 radio, you cannot bind one of the more upper market radios from Spectrum to that receiver. And the reason for that is because it has this SRX 200 receiver in it. Hopefully my camera will focus in on this here. There it is there. And it actually has an FHSS protocol. It's not a DSMR protocol. So these radios work on DSMR. That is a different protocol, doesn't work. However, if you get like an Arma Infraction or, the new, I think the new Creighton 8S has this as well. Any car that has the DX2E radio, that has a DSMR receiver, then you can bind the radios like the DX5C, for example. You can bind that to that receiver and you can get rid of that radio. So hopefully that answers that question, and we can move on from here. So what is it that you are going to be upgrading your radios to? What's a good radio to get? What should I be looking for? Range, this and that and the other. Cost is also a big factor. How they look, how they feel, cost of receivers. All of these things are questions that are a little bit hard to answer, because where I am and the experience that I've had with certain radios, I haven't owned every radio out there. There's a lot of people out there that are, Sanwa fans. There are others that are Spectrum fans, other Futaba fans. There are, all sorts of different people out there. FlySky, for example. A lot of people like FlySky. I'm not a big fan of FlySky. I used to use their radios. I did have a GT3C, which was one of the orange transmitters, and I had that for a number of years. That was actually my first radio, and I got to be honest, it worked okay at the beginning, but then I started having glitches and I started having issues. I also had the wheel that failed on it. I had to replace that, and it does have limitations. There's only so much you can do with that radio, and the range wasn't really the best. But if you're on a real tight budget, if you really have nowhere else to turn to, that might be a good one to get, because receivers are super cheap. I think I was buying receivers for about 10 or 15 bucks. But just be mindful that glitching and so forth can sometimes happen with those radios. Now, that being said, I will say that the newer FlySky radios, apparently I've heard some reports that they may have changed the protocol out a little bit or refined it or fixed it, and not a lot of people are having glitches or cutouts or anything like that. So maybe the newer versions are a little bit better, but I'm probably not the person to speak to regarding that because I don't have those radios at the moment. Once I sort of got tired of that radio, I did try out the Radiolink radio that you see here. Now, this is a radio that came to me, I think I got this from Asia Tees a number of years ago, and it's multi-model memory. It had a receiver with the gyro in it, which I thought was going to be really good, but this radio, quite honestly, it feels like crap, and it doesn't perform very well. I'm not a fan of this. Again, much like the FlySky, if you're on a really tight budget, you can get real cheap receivers for this. But the knobs and everything about this, the menu on this just feels really cheap and nasty. I don't like the feel of it in the hand either. You might see here that the trigger is actually quite open and the reverse trigger actually goes up, not so much forward. So a couple of times when I was using this radio, my finger actually slipped out of going into reverse. So I don't like the feel of this radio. It's really not the best. They need to kind of redesign this a little bit. You know, the protocol and everything on it I think might be okay, but just the feel of that radio doesn't quite do it for me. So I hardly use that. I think I've got maybe one car connected to it at the moment and doesn't really get used much. Now, the next one I bought once I sort of got tired of those was my Futaba 4 PLS. And this, as you can see, you know, it's been scuffed up. This is being used. The wheel is starting to get a little brittle as well, which is going to be an interesting one for me to get a spare foam for this. But this is an absolutely brilliant radio. The only thing I don't like about this, and I'm kind of disappointed that Futaba never really updated this radio, is that it does have a little collapsible antenna. And I've seen a lot of people with these radios and they break these off. You know, they get caught up somewhere, they're moving them around or whatever, and they just break off. Now, I've been very fortunate, I've been very careful with mine, haven't had that problem. Yeah, the radio's actually been working very well. But it is a little bulky, it's a little bit dated, it's a little bit, you know, mid-2000s. We're in 2020, so this radio, although it may still be available for a lot of people out there, it does look a little bit dated. It looks like it has 8 AA's in here, but it doesn't. It actually runs on 4 AA's. You can see there, and the tray is removable, so you can actually get a rechargeable battery for this, which I did use for a very long time. I had a rechargeable battery in here, which now I've got one in this one and one in this one, which we'll get to in a minute. Menus on this are actually very good to use. Futaba, you can't really go wrong with Futaba. These things are absolutely awesome. You know, for the radio that it was and is, and the money I paid for it, I definitely got my money's worth with this radio. And you know, if you can get one and you get one at a good price, even a second-hand one, highly recommend it. Definitely worth getting. It just doesn't look as nice as the more modern ones. The Futaba 3PV, this one here, I actually got from Hobbyco. Hobbyco sent this out to me a number of years ago. I think around about the time that the V2 Armour Creightons and Centons and all them were sort of released. They sent this out to me. You can see I got a little bit of hand grip on them. I do like putting these grips on these radios. They feel really nice. They grip really well. So I like to do that, and you know, it kind of feels up my hand quite well. Beautiful radio, really nice and compact, very small, very light. The wheel feels awesome. No collapsible antennas, of course, to break off. The trigger feels really good. The tray does run on 4 AA's, but I removed it and I'm running a rechargeable battery in here. And these batteries, they last absolutely ages. They last forever. The only downside with this radio is the menu system is a little bit clunky. There's no scroll wheel or anything like that. Everything's push button. So this, for a sort of really good, reliable unit, I think these go for just under $200 here in Australia with receiver, if you can get them at the moment. These are absolutely brilliant. And if you're not the type of guy that's going to be fiddling around with the menus too much, you're just going to set things up from from day one and kind of leave it alone, this is a really good radio to get. Because, like I said, the menus are a little bit clunky. You don't want to be messing around in here too often because it will get frustrating. It's not as nice as having a scroll wheel, you know, a little joystick like this one, or a scroll wheel like this one here, for example. So that's probably one of the downsides with this. If they had done something a little different here, put a little scroll wheel or a joystick, this would be very hard to beat. This radio is absolutely awesome. No issues with range or anything like that. The wheel feels fantastic. It's got a little bit of a drop-down feel to it. And as I said, compact radio. You know, compared to a lot of the others that you see here, especially these big ones, it definitely, it's a nice size. It's a good lightweight radio. The Spectrum DX5C, I got this one probably about 3 years ago now, and initially I didn't really use it too much, but obviously now since Armour have been going to Spectrum for their radios, and I've actually got my hands on a few receivers, I've been using this one quite a lot. I got a number of cars hooked up to this radio. My Limitless is on here, my Infraction, my Super Rock Ray, the Losi DB Pro, and a number of others, a couple of Creightons and so forth. I've got a number of cars hooked up to this radio. The best thing about this radio that I think Spectrum do compared to the Futaba is how nice the menu system is on this. It's absolutely brilliant to be able to navigate, just push in on the wheel, go back or clear or whatever. There's a couple of little buttons here. Absolutely brilliant. The menu on this, I think, is better than a lot of the Spectrums and a lot of the other ones that I've used in the past. The only thing I don't like about this radio, there are two things, actually probably three now, because I have been having some issues with my range in the limitless. So the range can be a little bit questionable with these Spectrum units. As you may have seen in my most recent limitless speed run video, I had some issues with range. So that's one problem. The other problem with this radio, and this is really subjective, this one, is the way it looks, how unnecessarily bulky and big it is. It doesn't need to be this bulky and big. They could have done the exact same thing with a slightly more compact size, you know, shrunk it down to something more like this, and it still would have been a nice looking radio. So a little bit bulky, but the grip is actually, like the handle here is actually quite big. It's quite wide, which fills up my hand. So for, you know, for big mitts like mine, I think you guys will actually enjoy the feel of this radio. It is well balanced. The wheel does feel very nice as well, very smooth. So as I said, menu, wheel, the feel of the radio, it's a little bit big, a little bit bulky. Range is a questionable thing. For speed runs, probably not a lot of people are going to turn to this, but for general use, you're not going to have an issue with range. Now, there is one thing that I think will make this a deal breaker for some people, or it may just not be a problem at all, depending on, you know, which side of the fence you're on. And that's the battery compartment. This runs strictly on AA batteries, and you cannot remove this tray. Although there are two screws holding the tray in place. You can undo those screws, and the cables for the tray actually run deep into the handle. So there's nothing for you to really unplug. You might be able to put a rechargeable battery in here, but it's going to require some modifications, and for you to actually install a plug of some sort so that you can plug your battery in. So a little bit short-sightedness, I think, from Spectrum. They should have given us a removable battery tray so that we could use rechargeable batteries in here, like I've done with that one, and like I've got it with the 4 PM that you see there as well. So compared to these two are actually about the same price. This is a lot more expensive. Even today, this is more expensive than these two. I think these are now available here in Australia for about a 170 or 180 from memory, without a receiver though. They don't come with receiver anymore. And then of course you've got the DX5C Rugged, which is a lot more expensive. It's like $300+ for the Rugged here in Australia, so they're quite an expensive radio. This one here is actually very popular with a lot of people. I've personally have sold quite a number of these at the hobby shop that I work at, and you know, they work fine. But when you want to go into speed runs, when you need something with long range, you probably want to switch to Futaba. And I hate saying this, but that is a fact. You know, a lot of guys will back me up on this, and I've had that experience. You just don't get the range with these Spectrum units as you do with the Futaba units, and that's just the way it is. Now, moving on to the 4 PM. I bought this one myself. This was not a gift. This was not a review thing. I actually bought this myself, this is an absolutely brilliant radio. I mean, if I was to pick only one radio that I could keep out of all of these, it would be this one. It just feels amazing in the hand. The ergonomics of this, the way this feels, the way the trigger feels and everything, it's just brilliant. The wheel, there's just nothing like it. It just, you have to hold this in your hand to really appreciate it. The menu system, of course, very Futaba, and you know, this whole thing lights up blue here, and it's really easy to navigate, and you get all the necessary information on the screen that you can see there. So this is just an absolutely brilliant radio. If you have the money to get something like this, I highly recommend it. The 4 PM sits nicely perched at the top for me at the moment. No doubt there are more expensive radios out there. There are people out there that have more expensive Futaba radios, but for the money, this is definitely one that if you can afford it, that is my top #1 pick. Now, here's the thing. When it comes to all of these fancy radios and what it is that you need them to do, you know, all you need is to have some of the features that you have already in a lot of the well-equipped radios that exist out there, as well as having multi-model memory. What that means is that you can hook up more than one card to these radios. This one here is like a 10 model memory. I think this one's 20. This one, I don't even know, I think it's like 60 or something. Same with this one. So you'll be able to put a ton of cars on here and have, you know, each car tuned to your liking. You can set your endpoints and dual rates and whatever else that you need to do. So I think when making a choice on what radio to upgrade with, number one, you got to look at your budget. How much do you want to spend? You want to spend $100? You want to spend $500? You want to spend $1,000? What is it that you want to spend? The next thing is, what is it that you want the radio to do within that budget? Ideally, you want something that's going to feel better than something like this. You want something that's going to have the same features or more features than what you have here. And is it something specific that you need the radio to do? Are you going to use it on a crawler? Do you need it to have extra channels for lights, or you're going to put a winch on, or you're going to have dual steering, or all of these sorts of things that you could potentially want the radio to do, and then try and find one within your budget that's going to meet those demands. And I think that's really where it comes down to. You got to clear out all this confusion, because I know that there's going to be about 1,000 different opinions out there of what radio you should go with, but ideally you need to cut through all of that and just look at what it is that you want it to do for you to meet your needs. Most people out there, I've spoken to a lot of people, I'm only going to have a couple of cars, I don't need anything that has 100 model memory. Cool, something like this will do the job just fine. All right, that has 10 model memory. You're not going to be fiddling around with the menus too often because they're a bit clunky, so you'll set it up from day one, you're done, you're set. And that's it. You got a rechargeable battery tray, this will be the one to go. If you're the type of guy that goes, well, I'm going to be switching between cars a lot, I'm going to be tuning things up, you know what? Avoid that one because the menu's a little bit clunky. Go with the Spectrum, go with something like that, which is, very similarly priced. You're going to have a really good experience with this radio, no doubt about that. But if you're the type of guy that wants speed runs, well, then maybe you might want to go for something like that, or even the 3PV, to be honest, the 4PLS here. So that will do the job just fine. So a lot of these other radios, the reason why I've got all these other radios on here as well, is just to give you some examples of what we're upgrading from. Now, some of these radios already have some pretty decent features, like this one here, for example. You've got your steering trim and your throttle trim. Now, this one also has steering dual rate, and it also has throttle dual rate. Now, throttle dual rate basically is kind of top speed adjuster. So when you pull the trigger, you want the car to go full speed, or you want it to go half speed, and you can adjust that with this dial. So I can turn that down a little bit, so when I go pull the trigger fully, the car's only going to go so fast. So that's the idea with throttle dual rate, and of course steering dual rate will adjust kind of your steering limitations, your steering endpoints, but you can't adjust it independently. You can't adjust just the left and then just the right. Some other radios can do that, not this one. Now, this one here is also very well equipped. There are some dials in here that you can use. There's a little tool on the bottom of the tray, which I found out much later after I had this radio, that there's a tool in here that you can pull out, and that allows you to adjust those little dials in there. This is actually a really nice radio. A lot of people probably wouldn't need to upgrade from this unless you really want that model, that multi-model memory function. But this has a nice drop down wheel. The trigger feels really good. I've also bulked this one up a little bit in here, so it actually feels nice in my hands, and got a collapsible, and it hides away really well. Most of the time you won't even need to have that up. Only if you're doing like some long range runs or something like that, you might need that up, but otherwise you can leave that down. 4 AA's, as you saw before, really nice radio. Most people wouldn't really want to upgrade from that. But something like this, for example, I really don't like these radios. And this radio has actually got a lot of really cool features. You can adjust endpoints, you can do all that using these buttons here, following a bunch of blinky light sequences, and then you can use the multifunction knob here to adjust a few things as well. It's got a lot of really cool features, but it's really, really difficult to use and to memorize all of those features. So on top of that, although this doesn't feel too bad in the hand, the trigger here feels really stiff. The wheel feels a little bit out of place. It feels like it should be lower a little bit. It feels a bit out of whack. So yeah, I'm not a big fan of these radios, never have been, I don't think I ever will be. I know that some people out there actually do like them. They do have some pretty good range, but ultimately they're not my favorite, and I'm not ashamed to admit it. Some people have talked about this one. This one I got with the ZD Racing monster truck a little while ago. The wheel is just a plastic wheel. The radio itself doesn't actually come too badly equipped. And some people have sort of looked at this, getting these things from sort of Banggood and so forth for about $30, $40. at least Australian dollars, might be cheaper over in the US, and using these as a substitute for the STX2. And you know, as a quick and cheap and easy fix, this might actually be a half decent radio. But I don't know, if you're going to upgrade, you know, spend a little more, get something a little better. I think that's probably not too bad, but aside from feel or responsiveness, you're not really getting a huge upgrade there. I think you might be better off going with something else. And then of course you've got the Team Magic radio over there on the far right, and you have the old Fly Sky radios that used to come with the Armour cars. For those of you who are new to the Armour game, this, as you can see there, this is what we used to get with the old Armour cars, and this one here is hooked up in my V1 Senton, which still works perfectly fine. These radios were actually quite good. They're just a bit dated. And then of course Armour upgraded to these, which everybody loves. These were probably the best ready-to-run radio that a lot of companies would put out. Armour, I think, hit the nail on the head with this one when they brought out the TTX 300. But it's been a huge step backwards going to these STX2s, which is a bit of a shame. And I'm hoping that they will rectify that in the near future. So I think I've babbled on long enough here. I'm not really trying to sway anybody to buy a particular brand or a particular type of radio. I think what I'm trying to do here is just give you all a bit of information for you to kind of look at what radio are you going to upgrade to. Do you really need to spend all that money? To be honest with you, you know, this radio and even the 4PLS have got features in here that I'm never going to use. There are things that these radios can do that you can adjust that I'm probably never going to use. But there are features in these radios that could be useful to you depending on the vehicle that you are using, and also depending on the application. If you're doing some, you know, mild racing, if you're just getting into sort of semi-competitive racing, you know, these ones here could actually be quite good ones to get into because of the features that they offer. This one being quite affordable, this one here not being, you know, your top of the range Futaba, kind of mid-range Futaba, with an enormous amount of scope for you to be able to tune and modify and set up your cars the way that you want in your trucks and so forth, and having, you know, huge model memory capabilities for you to hook up as many cars as you could possibly afford. So that is pretty much where I'm going to leave this one. I know that there's probably going to be a lot of questions there that I have missed. If you have any further questions on these, please be sure to leave them in the comment section down below. I will do my best to get back to you. No doubt some of you there will want to know something that I've missed on these ones, and I'll do my best to answer them. But for now, I'm going to leave it here. Thank you all very much for watching. Please be sure to hit that like button before you go. Don't forget to subscribe if you're new, and I'll be speaking to you all next time.